Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang berbahagia Dato Dr. Mehander Singh, Koordinator CDL, yang berusaha Dr. Mustafa Majid, rakan-rakan guru CDL, pengetua-pengetua dan guru-guru besar serta para peserta yang saya kasihi sekalian. Bertemu kita sekali lagi dalam sesi Connecting Dots Learning, iaitu menerusi hands-on online session untuk minggu yang ke-28. Alhamdulillah, walaupun hari ini hari bercuti kepada tuan-tuan dan puan-puan para guru, tetapi hari ini kita masih lagi ke udara bersama-sama berkongsi ilmu dan mendapatkan sedikit juga lagi tambahan ilmu daripada Dato' Dr. Mehander Singh kita. Untuk itu saya rasa kita bertuah kerana walaupun Datuk sekarang berada atau bersiaran langsung dari RNR Tapah, barangkali nak ke utara, tapi masih memberi ruang dan peluang kepada kita untuk berkongsi ilmu. Dan hari ini snippet sessionnya ialah bertajuk If the rate of the change on the outside exceed the rate of the change on the inside, the end is near. Saya tak tahu apa dia di sebalik kata-kata itu. Jadi kita teruskan dan memberi ruang kepada Datuk Dr. Mehander untuk meneruskan majlis. Dipersilakan Datuk.
Terima kasih Dr. Zalina dan selamat petang semua kerana dapat bersama untuk sesi snippet sebelum bermula sesi pukul 3 nanti. Dan sememangnya seperti saya beritahu kepada Dr. Zalina, saya berada di kawasan rehat Tapah ya, nak ke utara, nak ke Pulau Pinang, ke Perai. Dan tajuk saya untuk hari ini, if the rate of change on the outside exceeds the rate of change on the inside, the end is near. Maksudnya, dalam sesebuah organisasi, kalau kita dalam organisasi, individu atau kumpulan yang ada dalam organisasi dah sentiasa kekal dengan cara-cara lama, kalau tidak ada perubahan, there is no change. Tetapi walhal, kalau di luar sana banyak berlaku perubahan yang pesat, maka kalau kita tidak selari dengan perubahan di luar, ya, perubahan di dalam organisasi kita tidak selari dengan perubahan di luar organisasi, kata Jack Welch, the end is near. Maksudnya, why dia kata the end is near? Kemungkinan kita akan ketinggalan. Kita akan ketinggalan walhal dunia di luar tu sedang berubah. Maka kita sentiasa kena beri perhatian kepada perubahan yang sedang berlaku di luar. Di luar boleh bermaksud dalam sekitar kita dan juga di dalam dunia secara umumnya. What's happening on the outside. And if you go to the next slide, Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, dia kata, change is the only constant in life. Satu yang pasti berlaku walaupun ribut, hujan, apa juga berlaku perang, ialah change. Perubahan adalah tetap. Change will always be there. Kita dalam sistem pendidikan sentiasa melalui dan mengalami perubahan. Kita tidak dapat mengelak perubahan ini. Walaupun dikatakan oleh ungkapan yang biasa kita dengar, don't mend if it ain't broken. Tetapi ada pakar yang katakan, kalau kita dah terlalu lazim melakukan sesuatu, mungkin sudah sampai masanya kita kena fikirkan semula, adakah cara yang lebih baik? Dan kalau satu perubahan itu adalah untuk satu perubahan yang for the better, untuk peningkatan, itu boleh dianggap sebagai inovasi. Changing for the better is always innovation. Change for change's sake, perubahan kerana perubahan juga berlaku kadang-kala, tetapi perubahan untuk peningkatan merupakan satu jenis inovasi. Tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, sebelum ini saya pernah kongsikan, kalau anda lihat the next slide, bahawa kita dalam masa pandemik ini melalui juga perubahan. Bila pandemik bermula pada Mac, sekolah ditutup Mac 2020, ramai ada dalam peringkat pre-contemplation kalau anda lihat pada gambar raja yang ada. Apa maksud pre-contemplation ni? Kita tidak tentu lagi bahawa kita nak berubah atau tidak. No intention to change. Tapi bila masa berlalu, kita masuk ke stage contemplation. Bahawa kita terpaksa, we are thinking about changing. Kerana keadaan sekitar kita mula berubah. Kita terpaksa berubah. Kemudiannya, kita masuk ke peringkat preparation, persediaan. Kita belajar daripada rakan-rakan, banyak webinar, termasuk webinar, kemudiannya oleh CDL dan banyak pihak. Guru-guru telah memulakan webinar. You get prepared dan anda mengenali pelbagai jenis tool. Kemudiannya, kalau dah sampai hampir 6 bulan, bulan September, ramai dah kira dalam full action. Dah buat perubahan, make modifications to their behavior. Dan sampai sekarang, kita ada dalam, ramai yang ada dalam fasa maintenance. 6 months to 5 years. Apa jua tools, jadi tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, apa yang setiap hari Jumaat kita lalui di bawah CDL ini, merupakan sebahagian daripada peringkat atau tahap maintenance ini. Dan bila kita akan masuk dalam termination, bila kita dah menguasai sekarang ni, menggunakan tools, menggunakan cara PDPR merupakan sebahagian daripada kerja rutin kita. Kita dah biasa. Ini tidak lagi mengejutkan kalau kita terpaksa buat PDPR. So banyak perubahan ini kita terpaksa terima, kita seharusnya terima. Right? Tetapi kalau kita lupakan apa yang kita pelajari, ia boleh masuk ke relapse. Kalau cikgu puan-puan lihat dalam gambar raja, akan masuk ke relapse. Dan kalau ke relapse, kita mungkin kena belajar semula. Kita mungkin balik ke preparation, ke peringkat preparation. Untuk belajar semula apa yang kita pernah menguasai. So tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, kita sentiasa melalui peringkat-peringkat ini daripada pre-contemplation kepada termination. Bagi orang yang nak berhenti merokok, mula-mula dia di pre-contemplation sampai dia boleh ada aku yang baru tanpa merokok. Beberapa contoh, tetapi dalam keadaan peringkat negara pun kita lihat pada satu masa dahulu kita begitu selesa dengan adanya taksi. Kemudiannya kita sekarang ni dah begitu biasa dengan Grab. Saya rasa kalau tak ada Grab, kita akan kehilangan sesuatu kerana ia sudah menjadi satu perubahan yang lazim. So tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, terima kasih kepada semua. Seti slide yang terakhir, kalau ada peluang untuk baca beberapa buku, The Power of Habit, maka sama-samalah kita hayati bahawa perubahan itu adalah sebahagian daripada hidup kita. Perubahan itu adalah constant. Ia sentiasa akan berlaku, lebih lagi dalam bidang pendidikan. Lebih lagi dalam bidang pendidikan di mana perubahan sentiasa berlaku. Dan kita perlu terima perubahan secara positif. Itu saja daripada saya untuk petang Jumaat ini. Terima kasih kepada semua yang bersama untuk sesi pada petang ini.
Baik, terima kasih Dato' Dr. Mehander atas perkongsian ini dan safe drive untuk ke utara, Dato'. Terima kasih juga perkongsian yang sangat baik kerana saya kira semua orang tahu perubahan perlu berlaku. Perubahan kepada yang lebih baik, kepada yang lebih cemerlang. Perubahan mesti selari, kata Datuk tadi, sama ada di dalam dan juga yang di luar. Mungkin kita kaitkan dari diri kita kepada persekitaran kita dan kepada dunia luas lah. Ya, maknanya apa yang berlaku, kemajuan demi kemajuan yang berlaku itu harus ada perubahan kepada diri kita. Kalau tidak, kita akan tertinggal jauh di belakang. Kerana dunia sentiasa berubah, pendidikan kita juga sentiasa ada perubahan dan peningkatannya. Jadi perkataan yang saya dapat dekat ini tadi, change is only constant in life. So saya rasa one small step can change our life. Kalau kita boleh buat sesuatu yang perubahan yang lebih baik pada setiap masa ataupun time to time, kita akan mendapat satu nikmat keberkatan dan kejayaan. Dan kalaulah kita boleh buat begitu, itu juga satu inovasi seperti Datuk katakan tadi. Baik, terima kasih kita ucapkan sekali lagi kepada Datuk atas perkongsian ini, dan kita akan teruskan kepada perkongsian yang kita tunggu-tunggukan, iaitu pada minggu ke-28 ini kita akan berkongsi tentang lebih kepada bahasa Inggeris yang akan dikongsikan oleh Cikgu Emira Nabila binti Ramli, dan rakan moderatornya ialah Cikgu Nurul Asyikin binti Yahya, iaitu dari Sekolah Tanjung Puteri Resort Johor. Kita ada rakan yang hebat yang akan berkongsi tentang tajuknya juga menarik. Saya kongsikan sekejap di sini sebelum kita mulakan sesi tersebut. Baik, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, seperti biasa kita akan bercakap dulu tentang kehadiran kita pada siri yang ke-28 ini, perkongsian kita yang membawa objektif untuk berkongsi ilmu dan juga kemahiran antara kita. Kita nak membangunkan kompetensi guru-guru yang ada untuk meningkatkan keupayaan kita, dan kita nak membina jalinan dan jaringan yang berterusan, sebab kita nak berubah seperti Datuk kata tadi, kita nak berubah kepada yang lebih baik daripada apa yang kita ada sekarang. Jadi untuk siri ataupun sesi hands-on online session ini sentiasa membuka peluang dan ruang kepada para guru dan juga para peserta yang lain untuk mendaftar, dan pendaftaran itu adalah percuma, dan apabila kita mendaftar setiap hujung minggu ataupun pada hari Khamis, kita akan mendapat jemputan untuk mengikuti siri ataupun sesi perkongsian ini yang diadakan pada hari Jumaat selama 1 jam setengah dari jam 3 hingga 4:30 petang, dan ini ialah perkongsian secara hands-on ya, dan pasti pada akhirnya kita akan diberikan satu ataupun sebuah sijil. Kita akan terima sijil, di mana sijil ini boleh kita masukkan dalam SPL KPM kita. Jadi tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, networking kita ataupun hashtag kita, cikgu bantu cikgu, itu harus kita martabatkan, harus kita jadikan satu hashtag yang bermakna, kerana siri ini dah 28 minggu ini kita masih lagi terus menerus berkongsi ilmu. Kita bantu sesama kita, cikgu bantu cikgu. Terima kasih sekali lagi kepada para peserta yang hadir, dan untuk itu saya persilakan Cikgu Nurul Asyikin Yahya selaku moderator untuk meneruskan majlis. Dipersilakan.
Baiklah, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Boleh dengar dengan jelas suara saya pada hari ini?
Boleh.
Alhamdulillah. So, terima kasih diucapkan kepada Puan Zalina kerana menjemput, kerana menyampaikan sebuah menyediakan platform untuk kita sama-sama mendengar perkongsian daripada Cikgu Nurul Nabila binti Ramli. Baik, pada hari ini untuk siri ke-28 ini ingin saya kenalkan tajuk untuk hari ini, iaitu Preparing Students for the English SPM Exam and Classroom Based Assessment Through Hybrid Learning. Baik, sebelum saya menjemput Cik Emira Nabila binti Ramli untuk menyampaikan sharing dia pada hari ini, saya ingin memberikan sedikit latar belakang kepada tentang Cikgu Emira Nabila. Beliau mendapat latar belakang education dia daripada iaitu B.Ed TESOL daripada Canterbury Christchurch University, dan dia juga telah menerima beberapa anugerah, iaitu Anugerah Guru Adiwira PAK 21 Johor sehingga hari ini. Kemudian beliau juga menerima anugerah Guru Ikon pada tahun 2019 untuk daerah Pasir Gudang. Seterusnya, beliau juga merupakan Edu-Fluencer, The Performance and Delivery Unit Padu dan Ministry of Education, serta beliau juga telah dianugerahkan Adiwira PAK 21 daripada The Performance and Delivery Unit Padu dan Ministry of Education. Oleh itu, saya tidak mahu memanjangkan lagi program kita hari ini, dan saya ingin menjemput Cik Emira Nabila binti Ramli untuk menyampaikan sharing dia pada hari ini. Dipersilakan.
Baiklah, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya boleh didengar dengan jelas tak?
Boleh, alhamdulillah, jelas.
Alright, alhamdulillah. Okay, thank you to my moderator, my schoolmate since high school, I think, daripada form 1. So for her willingness to accept my invitation to become my moderator. Thank you as well to Dr. Zalina and Dr. Mehander for beginning the session. So my topic for today is preparing students for the English SPM exam and classroom-based assessment through hybrid learning. So I believe that in the audience we have many English teachers who would like to listen to the sharing for today, and I hope that despite me being someone who is not really like technology savvy or anything, I hope that there is something that you could take away from this session. All right, so moving on. So I'm just going to go straight into the SPM examination paper. For the new format for SPM, I believe most of our teachers who are in the audience, if they are English teachers, they should know that currently we have 4 papers for English compared to the previous paper in which we had only like 2 papers. So the challenge for us English teachers right now currently is that we have speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So before I even start, I would like to share the results for my school, in which the reason for me sharing this result would be because I would like to just share how I try to train the students. I have like around, in my school, we had like around 4 students receiving A+ for their English paper, and I taught 5 KAA or Kelas Aliran Agama, and we had 3 out of 4 students receiving A+. So I would like to share how I sort of like groom them in the process of getting them to get A+, and I believe that most of it comes from the writing paper, because reading is quite easy for most students, but when it comes to writing is a bit more challenging. Okay, so actually I've already done a sharing session last week on the reading paper, reading and use of English. So for today, if I have the opportunity, I would like to share some materials from that session as well, because that session had around 8,415 views up till today. But the audience were mostly from the students. So I believe that if I could share the materials again for teachers, that would be good as well. But I would try to focus on writing first. So when it comes to the 1119 English paper for writing, currently we have a slight change of format. I believe that English teachers are well aware of this. We have the email that students have to write. We have the guided essay as well as the extended writing task, in which for the extended writing task, we have a range of format that students have to follow, write in. Either they want to write an article, they can choose. They want to write a report, story, or review. For my presentation for today, I would like to focus on story writing because I feel like the students who I have taught previously, the ones who have already sat for their SPM, all those A+ students, most of them, they wrote story, because I believe a story is usually able to grab the attention of the reader quite well. Okay. When it comes to informing students about the marking criteria, since I'm preparing students for the SPM examination, usually at the beginning of the year or the beginning of a term, I would usually start off with explaining to them the marking criteria. On my Padlet that I have given to the audience, I have inserted this Padlet here, in which I received the Padlet from one of my friends, Jurulatih Utama. So on that Padlet, we have some samples of SPM writing samples, and then we have the marks given by examiners, as well as the criteria that the samples have met, as well as the things that need improvement. So I believe that by showing this sample to students, they have a slight idea of what it makes to have a good writing and what makes probably writing that needs more improvement. So teachers out there, you can have access to this particular Padlet on the Padlet that I have given in the chat box. Other than that, I also go on YouTube and try to produce a video explaining about the marking scale for the SPM exam. So how do I do this? I use Zoom for this particular purpose of recording the video by having the PowerPoint presented on Zoom so that I can have my image inserted in front. But for teachers out there, when you're creating content, just a reminder, just make sure that your full image can be seen, because when I gave the video to people on Facebook and so on, they were kind of like distracted by the fact that my head here is a bit cut off. So just make sure that you focus on a bit of the technicalities there. But in terms of the content, I believe that when you record yourself on Zoom and then you upload it on YouTube and Instagram, explaining about the marking scale, because for English writing, we have language marks to teach our students how do they get the language marks, how do they get the marks for communicative achievement. We've got marks for organization, and they should be well aware of what gives them marks for their essay writing. So I do this on YouTube by recording myself on Zoom and then uploading it on the social media that I have. When it comes to preparing them for classroom-based assessment, I have a full Google slide as well as a full webinar in which I talked about classroom-based assessment. That particular webinar on the Padlet that you see is organized by the Johor Education Department. So I talked very lengthily about it. Basically, we talked about assessment for learning, in which when we conduct PBD in our classrooms, we give our students constructive feedback based on the observation that we make through their writing assignment, their quizzes that we do with them, as well as the elicitation that we do. So basically, I believe that our teachers can try and go by step when we prepare our students for classroom-based assessment. Number one is for us to decide on the content and learning standard first, and then we decide on what sort of assessment method do we want to do. Should it be through writing or through speaking or through our observation? And then only we design our instructional activities. So here I've got the scheme of work in which every teacher should always fall back on. So for example, if I want to teach them writing, since I'm talking about writing right now, so probably the main skill that I would like them to have is for them to produce an extended plan or draft when they do their writing. And then once we do the editing, they should be able to modify it. So this would be an example lesson, which I lengthily talked about in the webinar that I've linked on the Padlet that I gave to our teachers in the audience right now. So basically for that one, it was a formal email, and I used Google document for them to draft their email. And then there was the use of the Google Jamboard, which was probably the highlight of the lesson for me to elicit from them what makes formal writing and informal writing, since I'm teaching a formal email. And then I also use Google Meet and YouTube to have my timely feedback. The feedback is the most important thing. When we give feedback, students should be able to act on the feedback. So I do that on YouTube as well as on Google Meet, because I can cater to the needs of students, whether it is through synchronous or asynchronous, because not all students can attend our session in real time, which is why we should have recordings given to them as well. And last but not least, if you look at my Padlet that I have given, so if I could just like show that very quickly, the Padlet that I've given here, the first Padlet that I have is an email for a job application. And if you click on that particular Padlet, you will see that I have a display of my students' resumes, my students' email that they have written either on PDF version or on Google document, as well as the Google Jamboard that we use. So I lengthily talk about that in the webinar that I have conducted, organized by JP and Johor. So I would definitely encourage teachers to look at that, because when we talk about classroom-based assessment, of course, we have to give them marks for PBD. Using Padlet allows me to put the marks here. If you're talking about PBD, most probably you can put 6 as the maximum mark on your Padlet. Whereas if you're talking about the SPM examination, then we would have a total full score of 20 marks for each essay. So I feel like the use of Padlet really helps me in terms of the grading. Okay, going back to the main thing just now. Okay, when I have already uploaded the YouTube and so on, so from the YouTube video, I could somehow see and observe which students are the most interactive, and what sort of answers do they provide to me. And so the question and answer session usually gives me an idea of what marks do I want to give for PBD. Okay, so this would be a video of me showing my students the slang for formal and informal language for email writing. And usually I would show them, because I have a full Google slide since I was the presenter for classroom-based assessment for Johor webinar last time. So I would give them the Google slide and let them know, if you are a performance level of 3, what is the criteria? If you are a performance level 4, 5, and 6, what would be the criteria? So on that Google slide that I have given to my students, I would usually show them the example. They would have the example, because these are students' authentic writing. So I would put them in the form of this screenshot, and then I would circle the errors maybe, and then show them why does this piece of writing deserve a level 3. For example, it is because this student displays some ability to have good register use. And performance level 5 for this one, for example, because of the fact that he or she has some relevant details. Most of it are done on Google document or in a PDF version. I make sure that I ask my students to do that, because I need the platform for me to edit. And this one would be the performance level 6. So once they know what takes what are the criteria of getting marks for PBD, only then they have a better understanding of how they want to modify their draft. Okay, so when I inform students about how PBD marks are given, I would usually insert the Google slide first on my Padlet that I'm using for the next activity. Like this one here, email to Sally from England, is an informal email. So I would insert the Google slides about PBD, and then only they start writing their draft following the criteria that I would like to. So this one would be a Padlet for an informal writing, and you can definitely check out the full email that my students have written on the Padlet that I have given in the chat box. When it comes to collecting my students' materials, especially for writing or for any other skills for that matter, I use Google Drive, in which I have a folder, especially for my own students. Like Form 4 classes will have one folder in which I have made it public for students to have access to. So individual students will have individual folders like this, and the ones that I have colored will be the ones in which I feel they have followed and adhered to the standards that I would like to. For example, if I ask them to organize their folders according to the different skills, like Nabila here, she's got listening skills, reading, writing, speaking. So once we are organized, we are more prepared for the examination as well as for PBD, because they can have access to it very easily. This would be what my students' Google Drive looks like. For this one, it is the writing folder. So as you can see, there will be some writing that they have done on Google document. There will also be screenshot of the PBD descriptors. For example, when I do the explanation on Google Meet, they will screenshot it, and then they will put the important items in their folders. So for example, we've got descriptors for writing in their folder. We've got the marks for language, what makes good marks for language, what makes good marks for content. So once we give that input, they will put it in their folder so that they are aware of what it takes to have a good piece of writing, for example, written for their exam and for their PBD. So it gives them a bit more organization in that sense. In terms of sending their work, I'm pretty sure that most teachers are already doing this. We use the Delima platform, or like just now I've shown, students can also send their work in the Google Drive. Okay, so for students who would like to send their work on Delima, it's fine, but sometimes there were some issues with the Delima password, so which is why I built a Google Drive platform for students to send their work. Okay, so I guess for today, I would like to talk about how I navigate my way to the teaching of writing for my students. Okay, and then the teaching of narrative writing will usually start by having a question. So if you look at the Padlet that I have given, Okay, so if let's say you are preparing your students for narrative writing, you can have a look at the buku format pentaksiran and see how lembaga peperiksaan designs the question, and usually from there we will try to design another question emulating how lembaga peperiksaan has already done the format for narrative writing, for example. So this would be one example question that I have already done with my students. Write about your experience being helped by a stranger, explain how that act of kindness has somehow made an impact in your life and what you have learned from the experience. So once we have a question like this, usually I would go through the process of teaching them through process writing, because when we talk about process writing, it is not a linear process. It goes back and forth. Once students have sent their draft, we have to edit, and then we give it back to them, and then they send it back. So for pre-writing, usually what I would engage my students in would be the reading of a story first, and then they would be annotating the story that I give, which I will show later on. And then, of course, from there, we will be thinking about our storyline and discussing on the relevance of the storyline and so on. Only then students will be drafting their essay. And I do also encourage peer review, which I will show you later on. Okay, so I first start, so now I'm like going into the process of me teaching my students how to write a story. So I usually start off with the plot pyramid first, because when we think of a story should not be monotonous. A story should always have something interesting happening, like an accident or an injury in the character. So it needs to have a plot first. So this would be one transcript that I will give my students. Okay, when we talk about how the transcript looks like to our students, of course you can see a difference between the first one and the second one here. So what I would usually do is I've learned a new trick on Canva actually, in which we can edit the image, and then if we want to apply the editing features on one particular image, we can just okay, maybe it's better if I show. Okay, so if we want to do that, we can actually try. Okay, you just like go to Canva, and then we can try and use the same filter for the different images. Okay, so let's just see whether we can have that shown. So right now we are on the Canva that I'm using. Okay, so this would be the Canva that I use for narrative writing. So let's say I have one image which is not clear, like the one that I've shown you just now. So the way for us to just make it a bit clearer, we don't really necessarily have to scan it, because if you want to scan, you have to have the original writing. So for me, since I do not have the original piece of writing, so what I would do is I would just have the image downloaded and uploaded on my Canva. Okay, like this one. Okay, so let's say this is the one which is not very clear. Okay, so all I have to do is click on edit image here, and then adjust the brightness and the contrast from there. And the thing that I find cool is that we can actually just try, and I hope that we can see. So we can select the filter code, we can copy, and then we can try it out on another image. Okay, so that is something that I feel like is something that teachers can consider using. So once we have a filter code, okay, for this one, it has a filter code which is already clear for that one. So I'll just copy here. And then I'll go to the image which is not clear, and then just try and paste the filter code here, so that I can make it clearer for that one. As you can see, it has become a bit clearer for my students to read. So that would be one way of editing the image and making it more appealing in the eyes of the students. Okay, so that would be in terms of the layout for the transcript that we are giving, in terms of how it looks in from students' eyes. Okay, so once we are done with the, once I have given the transcript for students to read, I would usually ask them to fill in this particular template. So this template Again, it was built on Canva. I do not need to worry about how I should ask my students, what platform do I want my students to use for them to write down. What my students would usually use is that they will screenshot this and then they will use digital ink to write down their answers. Okay, so this would be a blank template in which once they have read the story, they can put the exposition, what happens in the exposition, what happens in the rising action. For the climax, was there any death happening? Did anyone get injured? And then the falling action, as well as in the end, what happens for the resolution. So once they have that concept in their mind that a story needs to have this plot pyramid, only then I feel like they can develop a better storyline. Okay, so this would be one example in which when we try to think of how we want to attempt the question about write a story about being helped by a stranger, for example, I would usually give them guidelines like this. For example, I wanted for the exposition, they can have a normal day, getting ready for school. Mom prepared breakfast, okay? And then what I would like them to explain would be the delicious smell of breakfast, for example. So that's where the students try and develop based on the guideline that I have given to them. And then probably for the climax, we can discuss, I can discuss this with the students, of course. Maybe we can have an accident. The person was hit by a lorry and so on. And then suddenly a stranger came to help. So from there, once I've done the discussion with my students, only then we will try and design our own storyline, and then I'll write our own story. Okay. In terms of the character building, usually I would just start to have it written on Padlet, like what you can see on the Padlet that I have given. You can actually see how my students have written. First, usually we would be describing the physical qualities. And in terms of physical quality, I would usually start off very simple, like simply using adjective. And the good thing about having them write on the Padlet, as you can see on my Padlet, the good thing is that they have images which I can insert. So when we're talking about narrative writing, of course, we have to somehow paint the images in the reader's mind. So, okay, if you go to this particular Padlet that I can show you, okay, the one about a frightening activity, you can just scroll down a little bit. Okay, we can insert the images like what I'm doing right now. So that would be the benefit of using Padlet, because we can get images that students can respond to. So for example, if I wanted them to describe the qualities of a criminal or a robber, for example, I can have the images clearly put here, attached here, and then only we brainstorm what words do we want, like villainous, he's a psychopath, and so on. So what my students would be producing, first of all, is that they will give me the adjectives first before we start going deeper into the description. Okay, like the robber has a sturdy figure. The robber wears black sunglasses, because usually when we talk about a bad person or an antagonist, we would usually have the negative connotation, and black is usually a color that has a negative connotation. Okay, and then we could have words like muscular. He is strong and muscular. So from there, I encourage them to use adjectives first before we use other methods. Okay, for the writing of a protagonist, for example, here is an example that you can see. If you want to see the full writing written by my students, you can check it out on the Padlet that I have attached. Okay, so for this one, I have a full Padlet about how to describe a person. Okay, so this is just free writing activity describing a person. So once we've got a character that we would like to build, okay, I would usually just brainstorm with the students. If you have a good person, a protagonist, what do you want to start off with? Do you want to start off with the physical qualities, or maybe the personality? So for example, here we've got the physical qualities that my students have brainstormed. So we've got ways of describing. We can use physical qualities, we can use personality, as well as body language. So would be my first introduction to the students for a lesson about describing a person. And then if we go through the physical qualities, okay, for example, describing a character's eyes, here we would get color for the eyes, we can have a simile, we can have a metaphor, and so on. So if we look at the example written by my students here, we can see a lot of tips that I can give to my own students, and you can give to your own students as well, in which this would be my students attempting to use similes to describe a good character. For example, she mentions the character has wide eyes, which are like the ocean. So that would be simile. Her clothes smell like name brand fabric softener. She has the qualities of a goddess. She's exquisite like a goddess. So that would be the similes that my own students have written, and we usually just experiment with whether it is relevant to the story or not. Okay, another tip is for the students to enhance their vocabulary. I would usually encourage them, regardless of whether they are low, intermediate or not. My main concern is just to expose them to the language. If let's say most students are so used to writing using the word beautiful or the word good, for example, I would encourage them to go and search for the synonyms of beautiful, for example, and they can find words like exquisite, words like mesmerizing, pulchritudinous, amazing, and so on. So that would be other ways of saying beautiful instead of just simply using common words, because we do have marks for words which are low frequency and words which other students do not use. So that's why I do encourage them to brainstorm first on the Padlet. Okay, here's another activity in which I would encourage my students to read the transcript, and then they should be able to find interesting words or expressions used for narrative writing. So if we go to the Padlet for this one here, for the writing of story, okay, we can get the transcript. Okay, maybe we can try it out. So here, write a story about your experience being helped by a stranger, and then you can click on the Padlet there. And then my students would have access to the transcript first. If it's meant to be hybrid in class, I would give them the real transcript, which I have photocopied. And if it's meant to be a PDPR or home-based learning, I would give them on Padlet itself. So what they can do is they can click on the Padlet, and then they can open it in a new window. And then if it's not large enough for them to read, they can just simply scroll and make it larger like this. Okay, so teachers out there, if you would like to participate in my next activity, you can definitely do that right now and just try and enlarge the transcript, because for the next activity that I have prepared for my own students, it would be just a simple information gap activity like this one here. This was built on Canva, which is why it makes our lives a lot easier, because you don't have to like worry about searching for the image. You can just simply click on the template or on the elements, and then you could definitely get images like this one. So for example, in the transcript that I have given to the audience as well as my own students, what would be a description of the character's eyes? So how does the writer describe the character's eyes? So if you do have access to the transcript that I have given just now on Padlet, so you can definitely check it out, and then you can write the answer in the chat box. How does the writer describe the character's eyes? So again, we can go back and see the transcript just now. So which part shows the description of the eyes, for example? Okay, so you can try and find it there. Here it says, I stared right into his large blue eyes. So here we've got the mentioning of the color of the eyes. So that would be one way of describing the eyes. Okay, I stared right into his large blue eyes, and then amused. And then when we prepare materials for our students, let's say we want to introduce them to the words like amused here. We can put a GIF or an image here, like LOL stands for laugh out loud, and then they would have a bit more memory retention in terms of the meaning of amuse, in which it creates enjoyment and entertainment. So just by looking at LOL beside the word amuse, they will remember the word better, hopefully. Okay, a second way that we can find in the transcript is Spring's blue eyes glowed beautifully. Okay, so that would be the description for the eyes. And all teachers have to do, if you want to prepare materials like this, is just to have it done on Canva, and then just insert the sticker in front so that you can cover the answer first before you reveal it to your students after you have done the elicitation. So students who were able to identify, they're a bit faster in terms of the reading, and so they get that information and then they could use it in their writing as well. Okay, so the tip here when we are teaching our students about describing a character is of course for them to use adjectives. And as I've mentioned before, the use of similes and metaphor are quite integral when they are writing a narrative essay. So I would be brainstorming with my students, and this one is on Padlet. The good thing is that on Padlet itself, I can highlight certain words or phrases, and then I can explain to them, oh, this one is a simile if you have like, or as pretty as beautiful as. So that would be a simile. But if you're giving a direct comparison, it would be a metaphor. This one, two pools of deceit, would be a metaphor that we can find in a poem for previous SPM candidates. So all these would give them the input before they do the writing for a narrative essay. Okay, other descriptions that we can find would be this one. Here we can see that the writer does not directly mention the person smoking, but rather use a little bit of scientific term. He puffed out carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide. So I would like my students to emulate that, okay, and then maybe they can give some other ways of saying how a person smokes. And as well as this one here, the stench greeted my nostrils. This would be a personification. So once I've introduced this, of course, students can try and think of their own ways of expressing their ideas. Okay, so another one here, a description of the character being shy. My cheeks flush with embarrassment. So how do I do this slide? In actual fact, the character here, the image that you see in front does not have these red or pink, the face being flushed like this. But then I use Canva, and then I just try to reduce the transparency for the pink circle, and then it creates this image of the person being flushed with embarrassment. This one here would be a description of this character sweating, and in the transcript we could see I wiped off the beads of perspiration that had formed on my forehead. So when we are teaching narrative essay, it is good for that for us to experiment with the language and let students be creative. Okay. This one here is an expression to say, how does the person look at his watch? He stole a glance at his watch. Okay, so instead of saying he looked at his watch, which is a common way of saying it, we can teach students other expressions that they can use, like curi-curi tengok, right? Stealing a glance at his watch. For this one, it would be a character asking a question in a relaxed manner, and I put the image of this person smoking as he asked the question. And then we've got the word nonchalantly here. So once I've got words or phrases like this that I would like to introduce to the students, I would like them to reuse it in their essay. So basically, nonchalant here simply means he asked in a very relaxed manner. So once students have been introduced to the words and phrases and the way of saying certain things, and the fact that they can also include a conversation when they write their story, that would definitely make their story more and more interesting. Okay, the last one here is I would ask them in the transcript that you see, what are other ways of saying he said? Because if you have a conversation inserted in your story writing, of course, you don't always want to say he said all the time. So students would be reading the transcript. That's one way of me getting them to read this transcript and finding the expressions. So they would find phrases like he replied, he uttered, he blurted out. So that's how we get students to try and interchangeably use the terms and the phrases. Okay, so here would be another way of me getting them to start their writing, which is through the use of artificial intelligence. Although some people would think that, you know, it somehow impedes their creativity, it doesn't get them to think first when they write, but I think that this would be a fast way of helping them develop the idea. So basically, when I use artificial intelligence here, we've got a website, which I have already linked on the Padlet. It is a narrative device website, and it uses artificial intelligence or AI, in which all you have to do is you insert two words, okay, maybe a boy and a bully, for example, and it generates a paragraph for you. So once we've got the paragraph, what I would do with my own students is we try and improvise, we try and add more words and phrases which are interesting for the readers. So for example, here we've got the sentence, Tommy thought never thought that he would be a bully. He was the average guy. He has no distinguishing features. So my student would giving maybe another name. Jimmy was a frail, a wimpy young man. Okay, he unfortunately became the target of bullying. So from there, we try and improvise the one that the artificial intelligence has generated for us. This would be another example. However, this one is a bit more dense with errors, in which I would like to make my next point, in which students can sometimes have a lot of vocabulary, and it is sometimes interesting to read their phrases that they have used, especially when they use the words or phrases that we have taught them. Like for this one, my student has used words like timid. He is always a prey to a hazardous predator, but then he misspelled the word hazardous. And then he's got words like he needs to be extra vigilant. Instead of using careful, he uses the word vigilant. So those are words or phrases which are low frequency, but sometimes when he does have the errors, it would impede the understanding. It would make it a bit less in terms of the marks for language. So which is why I would like to train the students to develop a bit more accuracy, and I will show you how we do that later. I also encourage my students to try and use words like which are low frequency. Like instead of saying problem, you can say predicament, and then add another proverb or idiom behind it. For example, Jimmy didn't know how to tell anyone about his predicament, especially his parents. He was between the devil and the deep blue sea. Okay, so I actually have a full flashcard for idioms and proverbs, which I do show them, and we conduct like a game in class. Maybe they can draw the images, and then the others would guess what it means, or what idiom or proverb. So they would be using it in their essay after that. Okay, I have a full Canva video on how students can instantly become a better writer. So I have already attached that on the Padlet that I've given to teachers as well. So basically in that video, I talk about students who are usually aiming for A or A+, and what they can do to increase their language mark. Number one is obviously for them to improve their accuracy, because we can see just now, like my student who did this piece of writing here, he's from 5 Science 1. I don't actually teach him, but I just teach him during extra class. So what he is doing here, he has put a lot of interesting vocabulary, but because of his grammar, it does somehow cause him to not get the full marks. Okay, so improving their accuracy, I would give them this particular simple paragraph here. It looks like a good paragraph, but if you look closely at it, okay, we can see that thunder and dark do not collocate. What it means by collocation is that the words do not fit together. So that is why I would like to train the students. If you have one word like thunder, for example, you should definitely search for words which fit with thunder. And the way for you to do that is by using a collocations dictionary. Okay, I think that students are usually very familiar with normal dictionaries, but when it comes to collocation dictionaries, they need to be informed about it. So for example, the word thunder just now, you don't say dark thunder, but rather maybe you can find the adjective for thunder, which is loud, because we can hear the thunder, right? So it should be loud thunder, or the distant thunder, or the approaching thunder. So we can find it on the collocations dictionary. Okay, going back in terms of the accuracy, we have a subject-verb agreement error here. So I would just break it down like this. So if it's meant to be a singular noun, you should have a singular verb. And then you should follow it with words or phrases which describe the thunder, like the thunder crashing. This one would be the verb for it. Okay, so if we look at the verb for thunder, we can find words like growling, grumbling, rolling, rumbling, exploding. So the student should be informed that they should follow what is suitable in terms of the match, how the words match together. Okay, so refer to a collocations dictionary, and only then they can get it to be more accurate. Here we can see that the word dark just now is meant for the sky rather than for the thunder. Okay. Step number 3 is obviously for the students to use low frequency words. Okay, always encourage your students, regardless of whether they are intermediate level or higher level. So just expose them to the words and see how they use it. So because when students use more powerful words, like what I'm going to show you after this, they can definitely be more expressive in their writing. Okay. So if I were to just like quickly, I believe that most English teachers have this material already. It's just up to us. How do we want to transform it when we convey it to our learners? So for example here, Mary walked slowly. So we can use words like Mary sauntered slowly. Instead of saying ate his breakfast, we can say Ethan gobbled his breakfast, so that we can see in our mental image how the person eats his breakfast instead of just just saying about eating in general. Okay, and then we've got shouted here, Bob barked impatiently into the phone. Okay, so I've got this slide here, which in terms of us conveying the information to our students, if we have something like this, we can just break it down into different slides, and then just ask them to turn the dull sentence in more vivid sentences. Here we've got the sentence, Daisy and her friends met each other at the shopping mall. We can add the time at which they met, and we can add adjectives for the shopping mall and the name of the shopping mall, and then that gives more detail. For PBD just now, if we looked at the descriptor, we can see that the more details that students insert in their writing, probably they can have more chances of getting more marks. Okay, here's another one. Daisy bought a new bag for her prom, and I built this slide on Canva. I think it doesn't take a lot of time at all because I simply use whatever template that is on Canva and we edit it from there. So, and then we just add a sticker here if you want to have an information gap activity. Okay, so once you have elicited from the students, you can show the example first and then let them be creative in terms of turning the dull sentences into more vivid ones. So for example, like this one here, we can insert the smell, the image of that smell of the high grade leather. And then of course we can have what sort of bags would they like to purchase. And then if let's say initially the students want to write, oh, Daisy could not help but to purchase a clutch. You can also encourage them to use words like temptation. She could not fight the temptation. It lured her into the shopping mall or the outlet for the handbag, for example. Okay, so here's another slide that I've built just using the one that we see in the initial one. So the initial one looks like this. Okay, this one, you just simply transfer it on another platform, and by highlighting certain words, okay, like walk here is a common word that students can use, and look is also a common verb that students can use. And then when we change it into a more expressive sentence, like this one here, showing sentence, we can add feelings and emotions like excited, exhilarated. Instead of saying walking just now, students can be encouraged to use words like marching. Just now we saw the word sauntered into the tastefully decorated department. So these students, once they have been exposed to the words or phrases, they will definitely use it back in their essay because they want to experiment with the use of the words and be creative with it. So instead of saying it was crowded, you can say a buzz with shoppers from all walks of life. And then instead of saying, look at the latest handbag just now, they can say they feasted their eyes on. So from there, we can try and encourage our students to get more marks for their language because they are experimenting and they're using the words which are low frequency. Here's an attempt by my student, which is from a low intermediate level, I would say. As you can see on Google Document, she has a lot, which Grammarly, I use Grammarly or Google Document to try and identify my students' errors. So we can see the underlines. There are many underlines, but the fact that she uses words like exhilarated, merchandise in her email is already very satisfying enough for me because, you know, without exposure given, she might not have known the word at all. So what I would do is for her piece of writing, the good thing about doing hybrid learning, of course, is that once we get to have it written online, we can also have it shown during face-to-face interaction. One class's writing can be shared to other classes. Let's say this is a low intermediate student's writing. I can change it, okay, using an artificial intelligence, again, using WordTune app. You can see the icon for WordTune app with the W on it. So what I did was I simply edited a few phrases. So for example, we've got, I am totally exhilarated to receive your email. WordTune app changes it to my surprise at receiving your email was nothing short of exhilarating. So once we've got sentence structures like that, I can send it to classes which are probably a bit higher or more advanced in terms of the level, and they could be, it develops their language awareness in terms of the sentence structure, in terms of the vocabulary. So that's probably why I would encourage teachers to use it as well. So as you can see, the editing that I've done, probably below here, we can see it is my pleasure to write to you. Initially, the student write, I think that's all from me. So probably we can have, it is my pleasure to write to you. This one would be for the writing of an email, but I wanted to just show how my student uses the word exhilarating and how I do the editing using an app called WordTune app. So you can find WordTune app on platforms like Canva as well as Padlet as well. You can have it on those platforms. Grammarly is also available on Padlet. Okay, the next step is usually when I do narrative essay, I would ask them to include the 5 senses or the literary devices. So I'm pretty sure that English teachers mostly have this information. I simply just transferred it on Canva. So we can divide it into sight, smell, touch, or taste. So the activity, first of all, is to introduce the students to the different literary devices. Like for example, here, instead of the students saying Brian was angry, you can have a simile. Within seconds, he erupted like a volcano. So Bailey was happy. Bailey's face lit up like the sky on the 4th of July. I think this one is a song. Okay, and then we can also have a hyperbole. Her jaw dropped to the floor. Okay, so by introducing these techniques to the students, they would definitely be able to practice using it in their writing once they have the correct storyline that they want. Okay, I've also got a power word here, which means like a low frequency word. Instead of saying she ran across the room, maybe we can have a more specific way of doing it, like he sprinted or she sprinted across the room. Okay, so this would be how I would encourage my students to think of how they want to do their narrative essay. Like, for example, when we're talking about sound, you can have the sound of the cry of the wolves, for example. And then when you're talking about fear, it made my hair stand on its end. Okay, for the sense of touch, for example, we can have the simile. It was as if I was touched by a silky skinned angel, for example. Okay, and then I would try it out with my student. So you can have this information gap activity. How would the students express the pizza was delicious? Okay, so you give an example first, like this one. Okay, mushroom, pepper, and pepperoni sausages were layered thickly on the small slices of pineapple. And then you can give a metaphor, like the mozzarella cheese is like a bubbling sea of sizzling tomato sauce, for example. Okay, and then we can have some personification as well. The stomach is described like the howling and grumbling of an animal or a person. So that would be a personification. Then the students try it out. So this one would be my student's attempt. In which he uses words like salivate. That would be a word that maybe other students might use words like drool or my mouth watered, for example. But here, once the students have been exposed to more and more words or phrases using collocations dictionary as well as dictionary that they use online, they can find other ways of saying it. Okay, and then of course he mentioned the ingredients. As well as the simile, the cheese melted like flowing lava, for example. Okay, so that would be how I encourage the students to use telling to turn the sentences which tell something into something which shows a more vivid image in the minds of the readers. Okay, so these would be some examples that I've got from my own students. And if you want to have access to the full attempt by my own school students, you can have a go and check it out on the Padlet entitled How Do I Say This? So on this Padlet, we've got ways of saying, of expressing fear, happiness. So all those are attempts, although there might be some errors here and there, but at least we can get the whole Form 5 students to be on one platform, and then they can read the expressions written by other candidates. I believe that in future, if we have the time, me and my teachers in the same English panel, we can try and edit from there. And then the good thing is that when we use Padlet, we can have it published as PDF, and then that becomes a whole module in itself. Okay, so here's the next step, in which once we've done the brainstorming of the characters, and then we've tried to look at some techniques, I would be drafting a paragraph with my students. If you look on the Padlet about writing a story about the stranger who helped, I would have this exposition here and the outline that I've given. And the outline just now was for them to explain how the mother's delicious smell of breakfast is. So I would be giving them example paragraphs, like this one here is on SPM last print notes, which I've already attached on the Padlet if teachers want to check it out. So here we've got images of sound imagery. We've got this one here is an imagery, which you aside imagery, and then we've got some melted butter dripping and so on. All those like create a mental image of how the breakfast was prepared and how delicious the breakfast was. So when I do the exercise with my own students, I would usually be writing my own paragraph. And then if like this one is for the introduction of that particular event, in which after that they will be meeting someone who would help them when that person faces an accident, for example. But this one is the introduction. So I would be taking out the adjectives especially, and then we would be brainstorming. How would you describe online video games? How would you describe images? What words do you want to put in these blanks? And then only I would introduce some words or phrases which I think are suitable, and then I would definitely elicit from them what other words can we have. Okay, like I realized my petty crime, for example. You can have words like I realized my trivial crime, for example. Okay, those vivid images, clear images, for example. My mom's chilling gaze, her fierce gaze, for example. Scrumptious can also be described as mouth-watering, okay, delicious, and so on. So we can get them to think about what adjectives fit in order for them to make it more and more expressive. I've also got personification here, greeted my nostrils, which came from the transcript, and I usually encourage them to repeat the same structure or the same techniques, so that we can see that what we thought has already been used in their essays. This one would be me attempting to write a story about a bully, about the students bringing handphones to their school. So this would be one example question, right? And about your experience being caught bringing a phone to school. And then what are the order of the events and what you have learned from the experience. Some of my attempts to teach them had actually did come out in the SPM exam a few days ago, like the act of kindness, for example. It came out in guided writing. So I believe that whenever that we have the chance to experiment with all topics that you can, so that at least there are some things that might stick in their mind. Okay, so when I do the editing, I would usually tell my students that, of course, the process is a very daunting process. So for example, if you have phrases like, I wiped off the beads of warm tears, which had initially welled up in my eyes, you can actually edit that still and add phrases like, I wiped off the beads of trickling crystal tears, so that after that, they would get that idea, or add more adjectives. Add more adjectives to the eyes, for example, my sunken eyes, so that they will have this idea that you need to always be as descriptive as you can when you do your story writing. Okay, these would be my students' attempts. Okay, we can see here would be as a class, the showing sentence that we've got. We've got words like drool or salivate to show how mouth-watering the food is. And then I've got a simile here. The sound of my mom's pan and spatula sounded almost like thunder rumbling in the sky. So this would be my students' attempt to emulate whatever words or phrases that we have done in our discussion, and then use it in their own narrative essay. You can have a look at the full narrative essay that my students have written on the Padlet that I have put in the chat box. So they have used words which, as you can see here, the word gobbled has been used instead of saying eating. I looked worried and ate up the food. He changed it to gobbled. And then he has words like penetrated my room. Okay, greeted my nostrils. So those phrases are phrases that I would like to introduce to the students so that after that they can be creative when they do their writing. Okay, here's another exercise that I've also done with my students. Write about a frightening experience in which I wanted them to describe the order of the events and then how the person managed to save his or her life. So if you look at the Padlet, in which the students have written about a frightening experience, we can see the process happening there for process writing. Number one is, of course, the brainstorming of the character. Okay, and then the house, or how they describe a room, for example, and how the person tried to save his or her life. Okay, so let's just try and have a look at the one which has a frightening experience. You can go to my Padlet and just scroll down and you will find a lot happening on the Padlet itself. Okay, so I'll just like scroll down here. Okay, and then for part 3, extended writing down here. Okay, write a story about a frightening experience, and then you just click on that Padlet and you will have access to my Padlet. So among the things that you can see happening on this Padlet would be how I try and encourage my students to describe different things, and I usually give them outlines. Okay, so I'll show the outline later on, but the things that I've asked my students to describe would be, okay, describe blood. So they would be writing in the comment section, his blood smelled like a smithy, like raw iron and earth. Dripping blood, blood stain, blood soak, blood injury. So they would be finding the words and phrases, and we are just pooling resources from different resources, the words or phrases that they all can use in their essay. Okay, so that would be for narrative writing, in which I talk about mostly about fear. Fear is definitely a good way of trying to incorporate that feeling in which it gets the reader's adrenaline pumping and rushing when they read our story. So the task that I would give them on Padlet would be for them to continue. So Padlet will be the platform for them to write their draft, but then I give the essay continuation exercise on the Dilemma platform, in which I will give an outline. Okay, so I will give a full essay. This one was also written by my student from 2019. The thing about me is I like to edit the students' writing and enhance it by adding the idioms and the phrases, the low frequency words, and from there my students will try and emulate. So we've got this particular writing by my student from 2019, and then I give them a storyline, an outline. So for example, in order for them to continue the story just now, they have to probably try and, okay, what happens once the person is once the person's realized that a robber has intruded his or her home. So probably he will remember that he's got a potential weapon, and then he managed to skillfully move towards a place, okay, and then he tried to hit the man. So I want them to focus on the description. Okay, the description of the person, the description of the person's eyes. Only then we can have it more descriptive when they do their narrative writing. Okay, this would be an attempt by my student. I've got a few other attempts that you can see on the Padlet itself. So I've linked the Dilemma, the one that they sent on Dilemma, to the Padlet, so that the rest of them, the other students, can also look at the full essay that they have done. So I can see here the ones that I have underlined, the one that I have highlighted are phrases that I have got in the transcript, but then the student reused it and recycled it. And this student here, Nurhanis Najiha, she actually received A+ for her examination for English, and that goes on to show that probably the technique that we are using, like using phrases which are low frequency, and then the phrases which are suitable for narrative writing, it gets her to be more familiarized with the concept of narrative writing. Okay, here would be one example that I would be showing my students. So once we have this one example like this one, we would be breaking it down into the techniques used by the writer. So for example, we've got a metaphor for sweat just now in the transcript, and then the student rewrote it, has rewritten the paragraph. So he used beads of perspiration as well. Okay, and then we've got sound imagery, the ringing screams, vibrating. We've got sight imagery as well. personification, fear tortured my guts. So when we look at other people using the techniques, we can somehow follow and then use it in our writing as well. So I would usually introduce to them some what I call as power words. But for me, as long as they don't use it in a particular context, like if I don't provide them with the task, like write a story about a frightening experience, for example, if it's just in isolation like this, they might not know how to use it. So the best thing is for us as teachers to encourage them to use it in the correct context of the writing, okay, and correctly using it. Okay, so this one here would be words or phrases for anger or frustration. Like when someone has somehow broken into our home, we would be frustrated and angry at the person. So what are the words or phrases that can be used? And I usually have another transcript with a different context so that we can just bring their attention to the techniques that the writer has used. So for example, for that one just now, we break it into the techniques used by the writer. We've got words which I consider as power words, words like oblivion, pulchritudinous, for example, to show that the person is attractive looking. We've got a metaphor. We've got simile to show that the person was angry, as red as flaming fire, for example. So that would get them to be familiarized with the techniques used by the writer. Okay, the next step, of course, is for them to punctuate appropriately. As you can see on the slide right now, there's a difference between let's eat grandma or let's eat grandma. So the way for me to get them to be very conscious about their punctuation and so on is by editing their essays. So we need to do the editing and find the time to reread the essay that they have already done. Even for them, for the students themselves, they need to be reading and doing peer editing. So I'll show that later on. So for example, we've got this one here. I would be underlining the words or phrases which are wrong. This underlining was done by my colleague, and then we try and improvise from there. And then I would be editing my students' work usually on Google Document, because Google Document has the suggesting mode. So the ones that we tried to correct will be in the green lettering. And if they make a spelling error, it would be underlined with a red underline. If it's meant to be a grammatical error, it would be underlined with a blue underline. Okay, other than editing and simply sharing the students with the students the screenshot in which I've done the editing, I would also record myself doing live editing on Screencastify, using Screencastify. So from there we can record our screen, and then I can use all the Google dictionary and any websites that I open. It can be clearly seen on that particular video, and then we would upload it on YouTube for students who were not able to attend that editing lesson. Since I'm also talking about hybrid learning here, in a real classroom environment, if students have done their writing and I would like the rest of them to have a look at the errors made, we would be projecting the errors, the essay with the errors, and then I would be underlining and students would be correcting it from there. That would be a bit of a conventional way of doing it. But if you wanted to have probably one which uses artificial intelligence, for example, I also have started using Grammarly on my Padlet. So I will open the Padlet with the students' essays, and then Grammarly would be suggesting to us the correct versions for the structure that we want. Usually I wouldn't click on it first. The ones which are underlined, I would elicit from different students, how would you change it? Only then we show the options that we have. Like for here, this one, we have an article noun agreement error. So if you're meant to say, I saw freshly baked pancakes, if it's not meant to be singular, then do not have an S. If it's meant to be singular, then they should have plural, they should have S there, like that. So actually with grammar, it really helps us make it much more efficient in terms of the editing process. Another way of doing editing would be peer editing. I only encourage this for students who are more advanced and they know what they're doing. So I've got different editors from different classes. So for example, one particular student from one class has done the Padlet, the essay on Padlet, and then we will get another student who is more advanced, try to edit in terms of the grammar, in terms of the tenses especially, so that they can have more language awareness. So this would be peer editing. I also do encourage autonomous learning by having them do their own editing on Google document, because they can definitely see the blue underlines and then have it screenshot. And then once they click on the blue underlines, they will find the correct answer, and then they will do their error correction from there. Okay, so this is the probably like a new way of doing marking. Instead of just marking one individual student's work and then sending it to that one particular person, we can get it done by giving it to all the students available. Like this one here, once the student has done her autonomous editing, I can just have the screenshot and post it to all the other students from all different classes that I teach, so that we can make it much more efficient and faster in terms of the delivery of the information. All right, we also do have a writing module that we are using in preparing our students for SPM. So we've got tangible modules given to both Form 4 and Form 5 for my school. And then we've also got online module, which I insert on the Delima platform. So if you would like to check out the module, it is on Padlet. Just scroll down and then you will see this writing module. So I would like to just like promote this module in the sense that, you know, if teachers out there are searching for ways to teach students how to do writing, but you want to start with the simple task first, you can definitely check out this module, which my panel and I have tried to build. So I built the narrative essay module. So if you scroll down here, you can see the narrative writing module, in which we try to give different tasks, but we use the same transcript. So for example, the transcript is write a story about your experience sitting for an examination. In your story, you should include how you felt sitting for the examination and what you learned from the experience. So we've got the transcript that students will read first. Okay, they will read the transcript first. Okay, and then we will divide it into a few different tasks. Task number 1, they will be unscrambling the paragraphs. So this gives them an idea of the organization of the paragraph. Which paragraph should come first in the narrative essay? So, and then this also gives them an idea of the plot pyramid. Okay, so which is supposed to be an exposition? Which one is supposed to be the climax that comes later? So from here, I can develop that sort of awareness in terms of building a story. Okay, and then for task 2, we've got unscrambling the words in bold. So for example, fainted out of fear here, it is wrongly spelled. So once they spell it correctly, they will try to remember how a word is spelled. And then of course that could add to their vocabulary if it's meant to be a word that they have not seen before. Okay, words like shivering, uncontrollably, breathing, I wondered. It was the examination invigilator. So that could also add to their knowledge they are writing. Okay, task 3 in the module, task 3 would be for them to unscramble the sentences in bold. So this one would give them an idea of how a sentence should be structured. So for example, we've got I, off, out, fainted, almost, fear. So what we would like students to do is to try and not, as we do it in class, we do not want them to refer to the one which is the transcript. They have to read the transcript, and then I would ask them to close the transcript and then just give them this particular page. So they have to try and restructure the sentences in a correct manner. And at least this gives them an idea of sentence structure. The subject should come first, for example. After that, it should be the verb, for example. So that gives them a bit more language awareness for narrative writing, or any other writing for that matter. Okay, so task number 4 is something that I feel is very, very crucial for narrative writing, because when you talk about narrative writing, of course, students have to take care of their tenses. So what we did here is we simply picked the verbs, okay, and then we give the original form, the root word for the verb, and we wanted the students to change it in the correct form. So for example, if it's meant to be in the past tense, I almost fainted out of fear. So all the topics seemed alien to me. My mind went totally blank all of a sudden. So from there, we can somehow bring this awareness to students that when they do or they write an essay, which is a recount of a past event, they should be using the past tense, especially when they're doing a story or a narrative essay. Okay, and then the last task here for the narrative essay module will be task number 5 here, in which we give a much more difficult task in which they have to fill in the blanks with the correct phrases or sentences. Okay, they can be creative and use their own phrases or sentences as long as we can see the cohesion in their sentences. It relates from one sentence to the other sentence, then that makes it a good piece of writing. Okay, so that would be with regards to the module that my panel and I have prepared. We've also got another module here that I have attached on the Padlet that I have given, in which I was also one of the panel for the Johor English Digital Learning Resources Platform module. So we've got a module in which we have got all the skills, the listening, reading, writing, as well as speaking skill. We've inserted all the activities, which are definitely interactive for students. If you would like to check that out, I have inserted that in the Padlet. And I was the panel for the listening activity, but I do feel like it is something that should be shared with everybody else as well. All right, so I believe that I am done for the sharing for how I prepare my students for the SPM examination, especially for the writing paper. And that was only focusing on the writing paper for part 3, which is extended writing or narrative writing. I believe that I also have another sharing that I would like to do. Probably if we do not have the time, we can just bring it forward to another session for CDL. And I might just want to promote it here first, in which for this one, it is about the reading and use of English. And I believe I would like to share how we can get students to understand the techniques for attempting to score in their reading paper. So if I were to just like talk about it in general, basically, what I use, if I could just like mention that right now, what I use would be the Google form, as well as Padlet as well, when I wanted to reach out to students. So if I go and have a look at that right now for the reading paper. So we use Google Form to try and analyze. So from Google Form, we can definitely see the analysis. Okay, maybe I'll just like show 1 or 2 slides for you to just see how it has been done. And most of the materials that I present to the students were done on Canva. So I would definitely encourage teachers to try out presenting your materials on Canva as well. Okay, so for example, let's just have a look at a simple example. This one is from buku format pentaksiran, in which for reading paper, we have the gap text activity. So when you prepare your materials for students, probably you can consider this would be the sentences to fill in the gap. So try and put it side by side like this, so that students can select the best answer and they would be able to identify which one fits in the gap better. Okay, another thing that probably I can just like select from my material for the reading one, because I've already done the sharing during the webinar last week. Okay, you can definitely consider building your materials. When you present the materials to students, probably have it in a form like this, in which you could also insert the formula like this one, as well as the excerpt of the reading task. And then you insert your tips from there. So for example, if we have but here in the beginning of a sentence, definitely the sentence previously would be something which is contradicting. So have a formula like this, and then that particular tip will definitely be able to help our learners identify which one is the correct answer. Okay. Okay, so that would be for reading and use of English. And then I guess for that particular sharing that I did last time, the highlight would be the use of Google Form to analyze the students' answers. Because when we use Google Form, we can definitely see the students who have answered correctly and the students who have not answered correctly. So we can definitely somehow try and identify the reason why the students did not get the correct answer, and then express that to the audience. Okay, so am I on time in terms of the amount of time that I have for the presentation?
Yes. Yes, Teacher Emira.
Okay, so if I were to just like show you another one here, this would be the reading paper for SPM. Okay, here would be the part where students have to put in their answers and insert the paragraph. They will be given paragraphs A to F, and then they insert it, the correct answer. So when we are able to analyze, okay, the correct answer, for example, the statement is, I enjoy figuring out solutions to challenging problems. What sort of occupation should be suitable for a person who enjoys figuring out challenging solutions to challenging problem, and the person who is difficult for us to change their mind. So what I would do is I would like, this is also done on Canva. So we would just insert the article here. And then what we do is we reduce the transparency for certain parts in which we want to divide the sentence into two, right? So this one was done on Canva. It is not clear to see. So the one that I would like to focus on would be the first half of the sentence, and then identify, which is the clue. Figuring out solutions to challenging problems is the same as having problem-solving skills. Okay, so only then you try and have a look at another part of the sentence. Once I work out how to do it, it can be quite difficult to change my mind, and then look at the original paragraph. Words like decisive is similar to difficult to change my mind. So when we convey the slides to our learners, it's a bit clearer when they want to understand how they can try and choose the best answer when they want to select for the reading paper. Okay, so probably if I could still try out a few other answers. Okay, this one would be among the challenging parts as well. I've got the full Padlet as well. Probably I can share the Padlet to teachers out there if you want to use it with your own learners. This one was taken from the Google form that I have shared during the webinar. So for question number 37 to 40 for the reading paper, students are encouraged to choose no more than one word. So let's have a look at it one by one. So what I did was I just took the excerpt for each question. So for example, if for blank number 37 is meant to be for a musician, so we just select the musician and then we circle the ones which are suitable for students to insert, and then we elicit from them, what would you put in the blank? So students, when they answer the paper for English, they would definitely have to have an understanding of the definition. So for example, entertaining and relaxing can both be inserted here for the musician because it brings down their stress level. But when choosing the best answer, they would have to know that the word relaxing is the best word to choose because it reduces tension or anxiety. Whereas for entertaining, it is something for enjoyment. And then what I would do, what I have already done on the during the webinar last time was to analyze my own students' answer. So for example, if they answered using a capital letter like this one, okay, that would cause them to lose marks because they're using a capital letter at the end of a sentence. So from the Google form, I can analyze the students' answers and then why do students get it wrong. And when I give this information to them, they can definitely use the tip and avoid losing their marks. And then probably they can see if the instruction says no more than one word, then they should be using no more than one word. So phrases which have more than one word will definitely cause them to lose the mark. Okay, another one here is the blank where it says, in order to be good, for example, in your career, you should do certain things. So when we analyze the Google form, there will be students putting words like good with a capital letter. So that would be wrong. So by analyzing the Google form, I can definitely make my students more aware of the tips and tricks when they do their reading paper, and that they will be avoiding the same mistakes. Okay. So should I pass the session back to my moderator?
Right, thank you very much for the informative session just now. Terima kasih buat Cikgu Emira Nabila atas perkongsian beliau pada hari ini. Saya yakin dengan ilmu yang dikongsikan tadi akan dapat membantu semua guru-guru yang terlibat pada hari ini untuk digunakan di dalam kelas masing-masing. Semoga perkongsian hari ini dapat memberikan manfaat kepada semua, dan jangan lupa untuk mengisi kehadiran masing-masing di dalam link pautan yang baru saja kita share sebentar tadi di chat, ruangan chat ya. Dan jika cikgu-cikgu ada yang terlepas Padlet tadi, boleh tengok kat ruangan chat ada 2 link, iaitu link reading dan juga link untuk writing, dan saya yakin semua telah mendapat manfaat daripada sesi kita pada hari ini. Jadi saya tak nak melengahkan masa, saya serahkan semula kepada Dr. Zarina, dipersilakan.
Baik, terima kasih, jutaan terima kasih kita ucapkan kepada Cikgu Emira, Nabila, Ramli atas perkongsian yang sangat-sangat menarik dan saya rasa berinformatif lah ya. Sangat memberikan ruang kepada cikgu-cikgu yang menyertai sesi pada hari ini. Sebenarnya bukan hanya untuk bahasa Inggeris, saya dapati beberapa orang atau beberapa peserta kata tak semestinya digunakan teknik itu dalam bahasa Inggeris saja, tapi boleh untuk subjek sejarah, bahasa Melayu dan mata pelajaran yang lain. Kerana kesungguhan kita sebagai guru itu nampaknya terserlah dalam usaha nak membangunkan kemahiran dan pengetahuan murid kita, terutama apabila kita berhadapan dengan pandemik yang 2 tahun berlalu ini. Kita nampaknya telah membuka ruang dan kita sendiri begitu berusaha dengan kreativiti yang ada, menggunakan platform-platform yang ada, menyebarluaskan ilmu. Dan saya rasa kalaulah saya ada anak murid seperti murid yang ada pada hari inilah, pasti mereka akan seronok belajar dengan teacher Emira Nabila. Kerana sentiasa membawa mood yang baharu, sentiasa membawa idea yang baharu, corak dan pendekatan yang diberikan itu sangat menarik. Saya yang dah lama tinggalkan bilik darjah ini juga terasa macam, oh if I were you lah, I rasa macam kalaulah saya ni murid lah letakkan. Saya rasa saya sangat suka belajar bahasa Inggeris bersama-sama dengan Cikgu Emira Nabila ini. Begitu juga dengan komen-komen rakan-rakan kita peserta, semua menyatakan sangat menarik, penerangan yang jelas, great sharing, fantastic sharing, glad attended today. Ada tu kan, maknanya banyaklah pahala yang diperoleh insya-Allah hari ini. Dan kita ucapkan juga ribuan terima kasih kepada Cikgu Nurul Asyikin Yahya, rakan sama-sama di sekolah dahulu katanya tadi, mungkin di universiti juga. Mungkin satu ketika nanti kita juga akan jemput Cikgu Nurul Asyikin berkongsi ilmu di sini barangkali, semuanya berkemungkinan. Dan saya yakin walaupun kita bercuti, guru-guru sedang bercuti, tetapi penyertaan kita masih lagi boleh mencapai hampir ke 200 orang. Itu juga sudah baik saya kira. Dan kita telah sediakan di situ link kehadiran untuk hari ini untuk semua para peserta mengisinya, kerana link ini tidak akan bertahan lama ya, sehingga pukul 5 nanti kita akan tutup. Jadi tuan-tuan dan puan-puan para peserta, sila isi kehadiran melalui link tersebut. Dan sekarang kita akan buka rajah atau wajah-wajah kita untuk sesi fotografi. Kita buka sekejap, ambil gambar. Jangan tulis dalam ruangan chat dulu, takut nanti tak nampak wajah dia. Wajah Cikgu Mimi tu dah ada kat situ. Saya minta bantuan mungkin Tuan Juhaida juga rakan lain untuk ambilkan gambar ni. Juga kepada Urus Setia, Cik Siti dan Wani. Okey, semua kena senyum yang berpanjangan sebab kita tak tahu di muka surat manakah tuan-tuan dan puan-puan. Boleh mula Tuan Juhaida?
Okey, ada lagi yang tak buka kamera. Kita ada 7 page
Okey.
Okey, saya ambil mula dengan page 1. Okey, senyum je tau. Alright. Dah.
Terima kasih Puan Juhaida. Baik tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, untuk sesi pada minggu depan kita, sebenarnya kita akan bersama-sama dengan Cikgu Tuan Juhaida juga dengan episod yang baru dan dengan tajuk yang baru. Kita sertakan di sini posternya dan tuan-tuan dan puan-puan dah boleh untuk mendaftar insya-Allah. Jadi pada minggu hadapan ialah siri yang ke-29 dengan tajuk menghasilkan video kandungan, tips untuk amatur. Macam saya ni orang yang amatur, sesuai lah tu. InsyaAllah kita akan bertemu dengan Tuan Juhaida binti Tuan Muhammad Amin pada minggu depan. Dan jangan lupa sesi kita pada hari Jumaat jam 3 hingga 4:30 petang ke udara, insyaAllah walau berada di mana sekalipun tuan-tuan dan puan-puan masih boleh akses dan boleh menyertainya insyaAllah. Terima kasih saya ucapkan sekali lagi kepada cikgu ataupun teacher Emira, Nabila, Ramli dan juga rakan moderatornya iaitu Cikgu Nurul, Asyikin, Yahya atas perkongsian hari ini, dan terima kasih juga kepada tuan-tuan dan puan-puan para peserta yang saya hormati kerana sentiasa bersama-sama dengan kami di dalam siri hands-on online session ini. Moga mendapat keberkatan dan kita jumpa lagi pada minggu depan. Selamat beristirahat. Siapa yang balik kampung, yang sedang drive, saya nampak drive safe dan ceria selalu. Selamat kita dan bertemu pada minggu hadapan insya-Allah. Terima kasih dan assalamualaikum.